The BBC Hunters is the 14th instalment in a limited series of espionage thrillers called Tales of MI7, written by me, James Ward. It came out in 2019 and it concerns a contemporaneous plot by the Russians under Vladimir Putin to take control of the British Broadcasting Corporation. The words "take control" are meant loosely. A small think tank in the FSB concludes that filling the highest echelons of the BBC with British moral and cultural arch traditionalists, as opposed to the alleged liberal progressives who currently hold sway, might put it on the same wavelength as the Kremlin. And the beauty of that is that the people selected and emplaced need never know that Moscow was behind them. All that's covered in Chapter 1. Things go wrong when the Moscow creative minds hired to realize the project, a coterie of lateral thinkers innovatively recruited from the world of media and advertising, have their finished proposal filched by a corrupt supervisor who wants to take the credit. Partly to exact revenge, they leave the country hoping for asylum in the West. The GRU, Russia's Foreign Military Intelligence Service, is assigned to hunt them down. MI7 learns of the individual's departure and the GRU's intense interest, but not of the plot which precipitated the whole thing. John Mordred, the novel's protagonist, is ordered to investigate. By this time, the Kremlin's launched its BBC capture plot, and Mordred's caught the first whiff of it via a Daily Mail journalist, a hero, not a villain, who's then murdered in central London. The Russians in the BBC Hunters aren't presented as evil gremlins, quite the contrary. When they're not mindlessly just following orders, they're mostly decent. It's not their fault they live under a kleptocracy. My chief aim in this novel was to address a cluster of questions which were fairly high on the political agenda in 2019 concerning the BBC's fitness for purpose. The rise of streaming services like Netflix, the cost and the obligatory nature of the TV licence, and the question of bias had all made its long-term future a matter of intense debate. The BBC Hunters underlines the issues, but in many ways it's intended as a defence of the existing status quo. I used a variety of sources. David Sedgwick's BBC Brainwashing Britain was influential for its hostile tone rather than its content. More helpful was Robin Aitken's 2018 The Noble Liar, which presents a persuasive case, although still not fully convincing, for a rather different thesis. Aitken believes that the BBC is doing what Plato's Guardians wanted to do in the Republic, trying to control the flow of news to fulfill a broadly communitarian agenda, a project he considers well-intentioned but misguided. In terms of highlighting the central issues, this novel works as well as I could have expected. In the BBC Hunters, good people can be found espousing good arguments both for and against the corporation. The role of Russian so-called web brigades in spreading disinformation is never entirely absent from the picture. Several years later, the BBC still has lots of enemies. A good question for anyone who wants to get rid of it is always, where would you prefer to get your news? The Daily Mail isn't a good answer. Neither is Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok. A democracy needs informed citizens, and in the absence of compulsory adult education, the BBC is probably our best hope. It's far from perfect, but the alternatives are probably an awful lot worse.